Good morning, everyone. I think time we get started, I want to welcome you to Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy. I want to thank you all for coming at this early hour, though for some of you it'll be midway through your working day, I think. My name is Neil Lane. I'm a Senior Fellow for Science and Technology Policy at the Baker Institute. This morning we're going to hear from a panel of experts about a major health and policy issue: human papillomavirus, or HPV, vaccinations. Today's event is the sixth in the series, Medicine, Research, and Society Policy Issues. And this lecture series is a joint collaboration, I think you know, between the Baker Institute Science and Technology Policy Program and the University of Texas MD Anderson Center. We're very proud of our work together. Since 2008, the series has been dedicated to engaging and informing the public on the important intersection of science, medicine, and policy at the state and national levels. We've hosted discussions on several topics that have policy relevance, including personalized genomic medicine, science communication, and competitive effectiveness research. We thank the Baker Institute's Health Policy Forum for collaborating with us on this event and all the previous events, and we especially want to express our appreciation to the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, consistent supporter of our work at the Baker Institute, and specifically MD Anderson's president, Ronald DePinho, for his collaborative spirit. Dr. DePinho, internationally known for his path-breaking work on basic and translational research in cancer and degenerative disorders, has been president of MD Anderson since 2011, and has, of course, become a major force for progress in Houston throughout the state. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Ronald DePinho.
Thank you, Neil, and welcome everyone. It's really such an honor for MD Anderson to partner with the Baker Institute, raise awareness, and to educate the public about this critically important issue as a matter of health, the challenges and opportunities it presents, as we'll discuss this morning. So it's important to appreciate that cancer prevention and early detection are the most effective methods for eradicating cancer, for reducing the cancer burden now and in the decades to come. 50% of all U.S. cancer cases are avoidable if we were to implement prevention strategies, early detection strategies. The mortality from cancer would be reduced by about 75% in the coming decades. This is an enormous opportunity that are presenting themselves. And critical to that is broad dissemination of proven evidence-based approaches such as cancer vaccines. And that brings us to today's incredibly important topic. The human papillomavirus-associated cancers can be substantially reduced, if not eradicated, through the effective use of the safe and effective HPV vaccine. Unfortunately, here in Texas, only 7% of boys and 30% of girls successfully complete the vaccine regimen. So clearly, we have a vast room for improvement and a lost opportunity to significantly reduce future suffering and deaths due to HPV-associated cancers. So today we have incredibly accomplished leaders in the field who will educate us about the science, prevention, and clinical implications of HPV-associated cancers. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a very special guest and a good friend and moderator of today's panel discussion. Greta Van Susteren is host of Fox News Channel's On the Record with Greta Van Susteren, television's highest rating cable news program in its time slot for more than a decade. She's covered numerous high-profile court cases, including the trials of Scott Peterson and Michael Jackson, and investigated issues surrounding the death of Anna Nicole Smith, the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, and more. Previously, during her time as host of CNN's The Point with Greta Van Susteren, she contributed as a legal analyst for the O.J. Simpson murder trial investigation and co-hosted the legal talk show Burden of Proof. Prior to her current career, she was as a journalist and television personality. She worked as a criminal defense and civil trial lawyer. Forbes magazine named her one of the world's 100 most powerful women. She received her law degree in trial advocacy from Georgetown, where she was the first Stuart Stiller Fellow, and she was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws from the Stetson Law School. We have other extraordinary, accomplished individuals that Greta will be introducing, but I did want to make an announcement, and that is one of our accomplished panelists, Dr. Lowy, received just a few weeks ago from the President the National Medal for Technology and Innovation. And of course, he's a Lasker Award recipient as well for his pioneering work. So it's great to have this panel. Greta, please come up and introduce the first speaker.
Good morning. Just a couple quick notes. One is why am I here? With all the legal background, you might wonder why I'm here. Well, I'm here for a couple reasons. First of all, Ron is a very good friend of mine, and anytime he calls, I jump. Secondly is because of MD Anderson. I live in Washington, D.C., and it's no secret what MD Anderson is and what it has done to save so many lives. In fact, most recently saved one of my friends, dear friends' lives. So anytime I can come here and at least try to help and put a spotlight on any issues, count me in, because I'm a big fan of MD Anderson and all that it has done. It's no secret, we can listen to my resume, that I don't know a lot about science or medicine. I did watch Ben Casey as a child. I've not stayed at any Holiday Inn Express motels, though, or hotels, if you know that ad. But the reason I came here is because education is so important, and I know that so many of you involved in things like HPV, vaccines, and the rest of us are so, vastly ignorant. And you can develop all the vaccines you want in the world to save all the lives, to eradicate all the cancer, as Ron just says, that this HPV vaccine, can do, for cervical cancer and some head and neck cancer. But unless you get the word out and sort of educate, us dummies, you're just going to be sitting in labs. So these forums are wonderful opportunities to educate us. Frankly, in preparation for today, I did a lot of reading, and just so that I could, do the best job I could for you, and I learned a lot about it that otherwise I would not have. So to the extent that all of you are out here educating and spreading the word, very important. Debate's always important, as we know the pros, the cons, and sometimes we oftentimes change opinions about important things, and in your instances, many times you save lives. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lowy, who, as Ron has just said, has just won just a wonderful award. And he is going to tell you all about this HPV vaccine. Dr. Lowy.
Good morning, everyone. It really is quite special for me to be here in Houston, where MD Anderson and the hospitals have such a commitment to health, and I really applaud Rice and MD Anderson for taking this interest in this important area of prevention. I am going to, I have about 15 slides, and I have a disclosure. The NIH has patents on papillomavirus-like particle vaccine technology, and I am an inventor, and the NIH has licensed this technology to the 2 companies with commercial versions of the vaccine. Perhaps most important, the NCI conducts and supports research. The NCI does not make policy recommendations, and the views I express are my own. They do not represent those of the NCI. It's really an honor also for me to present to Greta Van Susteren and to have her participating because of so many different areas and different accomplishments that she has. And I think that if she understands and grapples with these issues, I'm going to try to make it clear that perhaps she can be a voice that can go beyond this auditorium to discuss this area. So this slide depicts for you several important aspects of HPV-associated cancer in the United States. First, HPV causes a range of cancers, not just one. The best known one is cervical cancer, and it's thought to be responsible for virtually all cervical cancers, but also anal, vulval, vaginal, penile, and oral pharyngeal. And importantly, about a third of the cancers in the United States affect males. About 3/4 of oropharyngeal cancer affects males, and a little less than half with anal cancer. And we've had a real epidemic, more than a threefold increase in the last 25-year period, which has been measured in oropharyngeal cancer, and anal cancer incidence and mortality are also increasing. This slide is here to just point out to you that on a worldwide basis, HPV-associated cancer is predominantly cervical cancer. The other HPV-associated cancers are not very common. More than 90% of the cancers in the developing world associated with HPV are cervical cancers. And the vast majority of the global problem with HPV-associated cancer is located in the developing world. There are two FDA-approved vaccines. The bivalent vaccine, Cervarix, made by GlaxoSmithKline, has a proprietary adjuvant, and it has particles for HPV 16 and 18. Let me just go back and tell you that HPV 16 and 18 are responsible for about 70% of cervical cancer and for more than 90% of the non-cervical cancers. And the quadrivalent vaccine made by Merck, Gardasil, has a standard aluminum adjuvant, and it again accounts for about 70% of cervical cancer, but in addition has HPV 6 and 11 particles, which are responsible for about 90% of genital warts. Safety is a key consideration. I have 2 slides on that. This was a 2009 article from the CDC using the passive reporting system of the CDC, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, and it raised a number of questions of whether certain side effects might be occurring more frequently than expected due to chance. And so the CDC also has the Vaccine Safety Data Link, which instead of being a passive anecdotal reporting system, actually has a frequency, a prospective study with numerators and denominators. And no vaccine-related increase was seen with these pre-specified outcomes, with the exception of anaphylaxis, which occurred in 1 case, which is similar in its rate to that of other vaccines, and similar conclusions from a large similar kind of study in Denmark more recently. Now, what about the vaccine efficacy? In uninfected patients, HPV vaccination can confer close to 100% protection against incident, persistent cervical infection and disease, that is, new infection, and attributable to the HPV vaccine types. And when I say vaccine types, I'm really talking about HPV 16 and 18. HPV vaccination can also protect against non-cervical infection and disease, while screening is only for cervical cancer. There's very limited cross-protection against non-vaccine HPV types, and the vaccination does not alter the natural history of prevalent infection. That is, it is not therapeutic. Vaccination is recommended for young adolescents. The target group is 11 to 12-year-olds, with catch-up vaccination for older individuals up to 25 or 26. The goals of vaccination really are twofold. First, to directly reduce the risk of infection and disease in the vaccinees themselves. But one of the great opportunities and aspects of the effectiveness of vaccines is to induce herd immunity, which indirectly reduces these risks by reducing the prevalence of HPV vaccine types in the general population. So now 2 slides about vaccine uptake, not just in the United States, which is shown here, but also in other parts of the world. And I think the take-home message really is, first, that it's very heterogeneous, and second, we are not doing anywhere near as well as some countries, for example, the United Kingdom and Australia. In red is just 1 dose, and in blue are all 3 doses. And but a little bit better than in France. But you can see that about 2/3 of the of the girls who get immunized with 1 dose follow through and get all 3 doses. These are data from the CDC through 2013, and what I hope you can appreciate is that with these other 2 adolescent vaccines, the proportion of Americans that are getting vaccinated is substantially higher than with the HPV vaccine, although they were approved and started at a very similar time point. And really, we see a leveling off for women. The vaccine was approved in 2009 for boys and with a cancer indication in 2011, and there is a certain amount of vaccination of boys now. There are a lot of different reasons why the vaccine is not being given, but lack of knowledge, not needed or necessary, not recommended, and not sexually active are several of them. Safety concerns, you can see here about 14% of the parents of girls, whereas safety concerns less for the parents of boys. Now, a couple of slides about some new advances that are going to be happening in the next few months or the next couple of years. First, 2 vaccine doses instead of 3. The FDA approval is for 3 doses, but it turns out that the immune response in girls and boys who are less than 15 years old is stronger than in older teenagers, and in young adolescents, 2 doses separated by 6 months produce an immune response similar to those in the responses in the efficacy trials. And the European Medicines Agency, which is the European FDA, approved this particular regimen, and the World Health Organization Strategic Advisory Group of Experts, known as the SAGE group, that's their acronym, SAGE, also recommended this. And so both for the GSK and the Merck vaccines for young adolescents, still 3 doses if you're older. In the United States, we still have a 3-dose regimen being recommended because no application from either company has come in for 2 doses. And I suspect that it might be approved in a couple of years, and my last two of my last slides address that. Merck has an experimental 9-valent vaccine called a nonavalent vaccine. And in addition to HPV 16 and 18, it contains the next 5 most oncogenic types in terms of their frequency of cervical cancer. And if there is high protection the way that, against these 7 types, you can protect against close to 90% of cervical cancers. And the Merck has presented at conferences and has submitted an application to the FDA for licensure based on their phase 3 results. And the key point was that the vaccine efficacy against the 5 new types was 96%. There was just 1 case in the experimental group and 27 cases in the quadrivalent group. This was not a placebo-controlled trial. This was a trial that used Gardasil as the control. And if you want more information, here is a paper. The expected clinical impact of the vaccine is to decrease high-grade cervical dysplasia, about 60% starting in women in their 20s and older, decrease in genital warts, 90%, women and men in teens and older, a decrease in cervical cancer, about 70%, women in their 30s and older, and a decrease in other HPV-associated cancers in men and women who are in their 40s and older. And in the United States, the other HPV-associated cancers are about as frequent as cervical cancer. So the President's Cancer Panel published a paper earlier this year called Accelerating HPV Vaccine Uptake, Urgency for Action to Prevent Cancer. And three of their recommendations were: first, to emphasize the ability of the vaccine to prevent several cancers rather than to prevent sexually transmitted disease or just to prevent only cervical cancer. Second, get healthcare providers to consistently recommend the vaccine for their patients. What the CDC calls provider hesitancy seems to be a very common problem. And make it easier to have the booster doses by increasing the interval between doses and by making it possible to give them in pharmacies or at schools. These are recommendations of the President's Cancer Panel. Thank you very much.
Our next guest, and we're going to have questions and discussion afterwards, but our next guest is Dr. Lois Raymondetta. She's here with the University of Texas MD Anderson, and she's right here. And I stole her pen.
And I stole someone else's. So that was a great presentation, Dr. Lowy, and I'd like to kind of bring it a little bit smaller. That was kind of a big overview. And I'm a gynecologic oncologist, and just yesterday I had a new patient come in who was 58 years old and hasn't had a pap smear for 10 years. And she has what's a 3B cervical cancer, which is obviously going to affect her life greatly, as well as she's uninsured at the county hospital and will take a great toll on the public health resources as well. So as we heard, HPV causes multiple cancers, and honestly, any cancer is too much. But cervix cancer in Texas, 357 deaths, and again, any cancer death from cervix cancer that's totally preventable is too much. Almost all of us in this room will be affected with HPV at one point in our life. At any one point, about 20% of people in the US are infected. Most people will never know that they're infected, and most people will clear, but those people who don't clear, we don't know who those people are or exactly why that happens at this point. HPV infection can occur with any type of sexual contact. Intercourse is not necessary. It can be just skin to skin. So condoms are somewhat effective, but not completely effective. So an estimated 80 million Americans are currently infected, 14 million new infections per year. HPV infection is most common in the teens when sexual activity begins. But the important point to stress is what Dr. Lowy mentioned, is that the immune response in those who are under 14 is so much better than those who get vaccinated after that point. And let me clarify, when he talked about the 2 versus 3 doses, that's an approval only for those under age 14. So those over 14 are still required to get 3 vaccinations. I am representing gyn oncology, but I'm also representing the new epidemic of oropharyngeal cancer, anal cancers, vulvar cancers, and vaginal cancers that are also related to HPV. In fact, by 2020, it's felt that oropharyngeal cancer related to HPV will be the most common infection related to HPV, more so than cervix. In the next slide, I think it's in the next slide. I'm going to go forward. This is where the problem lies. We have a pap smear that has worked terrifically for cervix cancer. It's worked well. It's decreased the rates of cervix cancer in the United States, unfortunately plateaued because of the woman I mentioned in the beginning, those people who kind of fall out of the healthcare system. But oropharyngeal cancer is totally different. Oh, yikes, sorry. As you can see, when we do a pap smear, the abnormal cells are right here on the surface, and they're easy to reach. But this is a picture of a tonsil, and deep down in the crypts of the tonsil are the abnormal cells. And at this point, we have no screening test. The way HPV affects men and women are different. As I said, cervix cancer is the most common for women, but oropharyngeal is the most common for men. This is a different population than we've seen in the past, where in the past oropharyngeal cancer was related to smoking and alcohol use. We are now seeing men who are not high risk for oropharyngeal cancer with smoking and alcohol use, but actually because of sexual practices. They are often of higher socioeconomic status. They are often younger, in their 40s and 50s. And again, as I mentioned, the woman yesterday, these are people who are in the prime of their life, who are productive citizens and taking care of young children in many cases. And again, unacceptable. This is a graph showing the increasing rates of tongue, oropharyngeal, and tonsil cancer, as well as anal cancer. We, as I said, do not have a screening test, and so we do expect that these rates will continue to increase, especially since we're starting to see the rates increase now when they're in their 40s and 50s. We may actually see a further epidemic in anal cancer because their primary rate age of diagnosis in their 50s and 60s. So with that later diagnosis, we expect to see continued growth of these cancers. Cervix cancer affects 11,000 cases in the US and 4,000 deaths. Each time I see one of these patients, I think that I'm dealing with a preventable cancer. Any cancer is terrible, but to see a cancer that was totally preventable is very upsetting. The patients who have been affected in the past have all been those, for the most part, who are underinsured and fall out of the healthcare system that we have at the present time. Being able to vaccinate these people through a vaccination that occurs early in life while they're still in the system would prevent their deaths later on. I have two pictures. You know, one of the bigger problems that we've had with cervix cancer is getting someone to stand up and be a representative. Part of the issues for that is that, as I said, they're underinsured, oftentimes lower education levels, and because of the stigma that we have allowed to be associated with HPV, many people have been unwilling to stand up. I have a picture of Evita Perron as well as Colleen Dewhurst, who both died of cervix cancer. We have a summit every year to bring these survivors together and are trying to build a group of women who will talk about this issue. Texas, as you see, is one of the highest rates, incidence of cervix cancer in the country. And why that is, I can only begin to guess. Part of it is our very large immigrant population. Many of the patients that we are seeing are often of Hispanic origin, but we also have a high level of uninsured. So Harris County, as many of you know, has one of the highest levels of uninsured people in the nation, close to 30%. Hopefully that will change. This is not a cancer that affects everyone equally. As you see, the death rates for mortality are higher in African Americans as well as Hispanic population, as well their incidence is also higher. Currently, 26 million girls under the age of 13 in the US are are here. If none of these girls are vaccinated, we will see 54,000 die from the disease. If we vaccinate only 30%, which is where we are now, we could prevent 14,000 deaths. If we vaccinate 80%, which would bring us up to the Tdap and the meningococcal level, we could prevent 31,000 deaths. For each year that we stay at 30% coverage, instead of achieving the 80% goal of healthy people, we expect 4,400 future cervical cancer cases and 1,400 cervical cancer deaths. And again, I can't tell you how upsetting it is to see somebody present to our system with a disease that could have been totally prevented. Before I finish, I want to just mention the cost. And hopefully this is a change in process. Right now, if you total up all the cost of HPV-related disease, it's over $8 billion per year. Most of this is spent in cervical cancer screening. We do anticipate that this cost will go down. Many of you may be aware that we did change our recommendations from yearly Pap smears to an every 5-year co-test where we test for HPV DNA and a Pap test. Hopefully that will reduce our cost of our yearly cytology screening. That doesn't help with the cost of a stage 3B cervix cancer present uninsured with a minimum of $150,000 treatment for radiation and chemotherapy. And for those of you, we didn't mention this one thing at the very bottom. RRP is recurrent respiratory papillomatosis. It is also an HPV-related disease. It's a picture of the vocal cords at the bottom. We believe it is also HPV-related. It most commonly occurs in newborns, but it is a recurrent, non-malignant, but troublesome problem where children have to go repeatedly for resections of these warty growths on their vocal cords. So remember that there is an HPV epidemic. This is different than any other cancer that we have at this point. We know the cause. We know in cervix we have a pre-invasive lesion. We know how to prevent it. There's really no excuse for us even seeing any HPV-related disease on the planet. Without a novel screening technique for anal cancer or oropharyngeal cancer, we will continue to see 30 years of increasing burden of non-cervix cancers. And we have no opportunities to screen for these patients because of where the disease is located. Cervical cancer remains a huge problem in our underserved and underinsured or uninsured population. The economic impact is $8 billion. I want to make one comment about the Australian data. We were recently in Australia for an international meeting, and it was very interesting how they approached it. We asked how come they have such great rates, and many people say it's because of their school-based vaccinations, which we don't have here. But one of the interesting points they mentioned was that it was actually a source of national pride. They feel that the vaccine was invented in Australia, and this was their opportunity to lead the world and show the world that they could eliminate this disease. And so there really were no questions about how you get it or anything along those ideas, and I thought it was really fascinating. One other point was that although their data is good, they do have problems too. They don't mention the indigenous populations so much in their data. They actually have very poor vaccination rates in their indigenous populations because they too fall out of their healthcare system, as well as are in remote areas. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And our third speaker is the Honorable Dr. John Zerwas, who has the distinction of being also in Texas politics, in addition to being a doctor. Doctor.
Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you some thoughts from the ugly side of this issue, the political side of it, if you will. This is something, whether we like it or not, despite what all the great science may be, and my two predecessors in terms of speaking to you they far outweigh me on any kind of scientific knowledge on this, and I highly respect that. And you've gotten what I think is an incredibly great overview of how logical it is to go down this road. But that has never defined Texas politics. It's never defined the political world in general. And so, but the bottom line is that this is probably the best system we have that exists in the world in terms of the people defining what they are going to, quote unquote, impose upon themselves in the form of laws and mandates and so forth. And so for that, I do find it a great privilege and honor to get to serve in the Texas legislature. I say that right now going into the session. I will tell you in March, I may not quite feel that way, but it has been a great ride. I've had the privilege to serve since 2007 and going into my 5th term now, and have had a lot of great support from people, especially from MD Anderson, on what I think are really some terrific bills that I've been allowed to participate in that I think have made a huge difference in people's lives. And I'll stand before you today and say I think what is in the works here as being shared with you today is exactly along those lines. And perhaps if probably more than any other thing that I think I've had the opportunity to be involved in, you know, cancer is something that devastates people's lives. It has had a huge impact in my life recently. And to see what are the possibilities that we have in terms of really eradicating cancer is really very awe-inspiring. But it has to go through, ultimately, the Texas legislature. for us to see the kind of effectiveness that we're going to see from the great discoveries and the great research that has already been shared with you. So let me just take you a little bit. I'm sorry, I hit some slides there. These are not my slides, so you have to, unfortunately, you got to look at me. So that's all I've got here for you. And I'm an anesthesiologist. I put people to sleep for a living, you know. So, you know, what the heck was that all about, coming in at this early hour of the morning and having a guy who professionally puts people to sleep? Well, I also professionally wake you up, and that's how I get paid. So, you know, so I'm going to be sure that I kind of keep you awake for a good part of this. So let's talk a little bit about the story of HPV in Texas. And it's been a recent story. And in fact, it happened in my initial legislative session in 2007. Governor Perry executed an order to say that all the sixth grade girls, if you will, are going to be mandated to get the HPV vaccine. And with the intent that this was a cancer preventative. Exactly the right idea, exactly the right intent, exactly the wrong way to do it. And needless to say, this erupted into a firestorm very early in the session. And I will tell you, I was on the other side of that. I said, look, you don't bypass the legislature to take up what is a very, very important issue, a mandate of a vaccine for what was characterized as a sexually transmitted disease, and that's how it got characterized, and take that right away from the parents or interject the legislature on behalf of the parents to do this. Came totally out of the blue, and ultimately it failed. The order was overturned by the legislature in an overwhelming vote, and it was really has not been visited since then. And that's a good thing, because it takes time in the legislature, since we only meet every other year, to kind of let things sort of die and go away. And I think we're at that point right now. The political climate back then was very conservative. I would say it's probably even more conservative now with the recent elections that we've had. Most of you all have a pretty good sense of who the players are. And in general, yes, we're going to have a new governor. I think he's going to perform very well in this role, personally. The Senate is going to be a new chamber altogether. Mark, you're going to have your work cut out for you. New leadership. There's going to be 8 new senators, 8 out of 31. That's a gigantic turnover in that area. And most would say it tends to be a much more conservative crowd. The House, politically, the temperature is to the right. Not more so politically conservative, I think, but there are some new players there. 98 Republicans, 52 Democrats, and so it's overwhelmingly going to be conservative, but 98 Republicans is not 98 Republicans. There's all varieties within that, and so you're never going to see that whole group vote as a block on anything, I can assure you. So anyway, as we looked at this, the governor had this idea that, you know, let's take advantage of this great new product that's out there, and let's do something that is a real benefit to Texans. And brought even in somebody who you know, was diagnosed with a cervical cancer and had a very, very poor prognosis, in fact, and I think ultimately did die of the condition. It's a very powerful story, and those are the kinds of things that really move legislators, you know. You have to have good, sound science, but there's nothing more effective than stories to help move the members of the legislature. And I shared this with the group last night. A good friend of mine, I can't take credit for this line, but I think it's a great line. You know, he said, you know, the plural of anecdote is not anecdotes. The plural of anecdotes is public policy. And so what really comes across and affects members is, yes, the very sound science that's there. Okay, fine, we get that, you know, and it comes from the most renowned institutes out there and the most renowned scientists out there. But boy, parade somebody in front of me that survived Neisseria meningitis from you know, getting this from college, and now has limbs that have been amputated, and has really just had to deal with some of the horrors of that disease. That is very powerful. And guess what? There is a mandate for Neisseria meningitis for college kids. Not only those that are going into the dorm setting, but outside the dorm setting now. That's how powerful that is. That's also something of an encouragement to say, as we talk about this, that we did that just a couple of sessions ago. And it was carried by one of the most conservative members of the legislature, not a physician, but somebody who was the representative for one of these children who died in that particular area, in the Sugar Land area. Charlie Howard, a good friend of mine. He has a very strong conservative slant. He's no longer in the legislature now. But he was very effective in bringing that forward. And part of that was, yes, what are the facts? What do we need to know about that? But here is what happens. Yes, the horrors of somebody who dies of that disease is extreme, if any of you have ever witnessed it. But some of the sequelae from it are also horrific. Now, that is a pretty isolated, uncommon thing. We are not talking about thousands and millions of people with that disease like we are now. I use the same case with Ebola. I say, yeah, that's an exotic disease. We all got fired up about it, and we thought that was a horrible thing. I tell people, I say, you know, the most important thing you can do as a consequence of this Ebola story is go get your flu vaccine. I said, because thousands upon thousands of people this year are going to die of influenza, a preventable disease for the most part. Go get a flu vaccine, and you're going to have done a big, big part of really doing something about what thousands of people will die from, and they do every year. So that's a whole side story here, not related to what we're here to talk about today. But it gives you a sense of what we sort of deal with in the legislature, and it's the pathway that we have to talk about as we go forward. And I think as we look at, you know, the facts and some of the staggering details around this, it's very important that we learn from the experiences of the past. And the experience of the past would tell you, if this is in any way framed as a way to treat a sexually transmitted disease, it's going nowhere. Now, there may be some educational efforts and things like that could go on out there. But similarly to considering the political temperature of the legislature, it's got to be a focus on a cancer preventative. And what you have already heard is clearly that focus on that. In my conversations with MD Anderson, as I said, you know, if you're going to ask me to carry this, we've got to really, you know, reframe this thing, because I'll get roasted on this. I get roasted every session on something. Last time it was Medicaid expansion, and time before that it was the state-based exchange for Obamacare and stuff like that, you know. And I said, that's fine. You know, I don't mind getting out there in front of issues that have a real sound basis for why you want to do them, whether other members of my party agree or not with it. But I always think that at the end of the day, sound science and sound public health policy trumps whether you got an R or a D behind your name. Don't always win that game, but, you know, I think that I certainly have a comfort level with that. There is lots that can be done, certainly in terms of improving our vaccination rate in Texas. I think we've seen a great deal of those numbers up here. I won't reiterate them. I can't reiterate them. But what I will tell you is that the road through the legislature is a long, arduous road. And there are thousands of ways to kill bills, very few ways to get bills passed. And the people in this room, a lot of the people in this room understand that and know that. But when you have a very, very strong, justifiable cause, especially from a public health point of view, this is a great opportunity for us to do something. The state is in great economic condition right now. We do have some recent efforts towards passing some public health policy related to vaccines. We have invested billions of dollars into CPRIT to help eradicate cancers. Is there anything more cost effective than an HPV vaccine for these cancers in both men and women when we talk about the things that we do? This is not the $3 billion that we're investing over 10 years through the CPRIT. This is a very sound, cost-effective way to deal with what is, let's face it, a public health issue. The number of people that are infected, could be infected with this is extraordinary, and we have an extraordinary opportunity to really kind of, you know, stamp out what are the most serious consequences of this infection. So I look forward to the question and answer. Thank you for your time, and appreciate getting to be part of this great panel. Thank you all.
So, well, I may be just the perfect person to moderate this because I come with such fresh eyes, another way to say uneducated. And naturally I have lots of questions, and I'm also in the business of trying to figure out how to get people interested in something. So I have a thought. One is that you said if you talk about sexually transmitted, that people sort of, that's a very provocative issue. People think that it's good if you take a vaccine, that young people are going to go out and have sex. So then all three of you talked about cancer prevention, how important that is, and who doesn't, no one wants cancer, and you say cancer, it scares the living daylights out of anybody. But here's what I got out of the discussion here is that, holy cow, this is contagious. That puts this cancer in a whole different category. So is this cancer contagious?
It's actually the virus that's contagious.
Okay. That sounds, that to me, if I were selling as a public policy thing, that would catch my attention. Is it ever sort of positioned that way? You guys talking all these fancy science words, but I think, holy cow, contagious?
Yeah, I think that words mean things when you frame them in a certain way. When polio was, I think, is probably one of the greatest examples of a disease that we've eradicated, which created great fear within people and the consequences of that. I think that similarly, you can kind of look at what makes people get very concerned and willing to get behind an issue, despite the fact that it's a quote unquote sexually transmitted disease. You can get past away, but if you frame it in a way that says, this is a contagious issue, it's a public health issue, and the consequence is, as you said, it's cancer. It's not even paralysis, it's cancer, and it's likely to kill you if it's left untreated.
Dr. Lowy, are there any side effects? I think you had one where you showed some anaphylactic shock, but what's the worst case scenario if you're 10 or 12 and you get this vaccine?
Well, the one demonstrated side effect is the anaphylaxis, and it hasn't been lethal. A fair number of people, have local pain. They may have low-grade fever and things like that. But what has happened is that there are anecdotal cases of people who have had, serious neurological problems, et cetera. But the prospective studies have not found that those kinds of side effects actually are attributable to the vaccine.
Compare and contrast to the polio vaccine. Does it have, when you look at the studies so far, does it have, more adverse effects or less adverse effects?
Well, I would say in terms of local effects from the vaccine itself, probably more. In terms of serious adverse effects, the Sabin vaccine, actually, there are rare individuals who develop paralytic polio with the Sabin vaccine, and it has been essentially replaced in the United States by using the inactivated Salk vaccine because that side effect essentially doesn't happen.
Just so I'm clear, in my reading is that if you get this vaccine, you're not going to get this cancer. You're not going to get this virus, right? This is different.
Actually, this is one of the complications and limitations of the current vaccines. The vaccines are very good for the particular HPV types that they target. But as I tried to point out, there are about 30% of cervical cancers, for example, that are not attributable to those two HPV types. And so you still are susceptible to that. And in that sense, the HPV vaccine is different from most of our vaccines because if you take a vaccine, you can check off that disease, you can forget about that disease. But unfortunately, there are so many different HPV types that thus far we can't protect against 100% of them.
Dr. Raimondi, there's all the discussion about this vaccine for young people under 20. Does that mean that it's not for someone who's 25, 30, who's still pretty young and sexually active? Is this not effective for that person, or
the issue really is cost effectiveness. I think that women are at particularly high risk of acquiring HPV infection soon after they initiate sexual activity. Within 4 months, 1 in 5 will be HPV positive, even with one lifetime sexual partner, and within 2 years, even with one lifetime sexual partner, the chances are almost 1 in 2 that a woman will be HPV infected. But the problem is that if you wait until you're in your mid-20s or your 30s, you have already had a fair proportion of the potentially serious infections. So in older individuals above the age of 25, the vaccine can be protective against new infection, but the number of new infections is nowhere near as great as if you were to vaccinate before people became sexually active.
Dr. Ramani, cost. What does this cost per person, Dr. Ramani?
So at this point, we believe that the vaccine's cost definitely is less than the $8 billion that we're spending right now in the treatment of all
back end when they get the cancer.
Exactly. One of the important things that we'll be dealing with over the next few months is the 9-valent or nanovalent vaccine that's coming out, and whether or not that will be as cost effective as the 2 vaccines that we have available now. And just to kind of reiterate what Dr. Lowy said, is that as he said, it's cost effective to give it when they're younger for a number of reasons. One, because they're not exposed, and it is a preventative, not a therapeutic. And just in reference to your question, if you are older, you're more likely to have been exposed to the vaccine. That doesn't mean that it couldn't prevent some of the HPV-related diseases. Let's say you get infected with HPV 11 and 6. Remember, there's over 120 different types of HPVs. There's about 30 types that infect the genital area, and then there's about 12 or so that are really known to be carcinogenic. So let's say you get infected with 1 or 2 of those, you still could get the vaccine later, and it would be effective maybe preventing those others, but most likely it's a lot less effective than if you gave it early. And to say that, as he said, you're not done with the disease, we still recommend continued screening every 5 years with the co-test, HPV and the Pap test. So in terms of the cost, I think that that's going to be a question that we're going to have to deal with over the next 6 months, because that 9-valent nanovalent does appear to get us higher rates of prevention because it prevents so many different types of the HPV, but whether or not that's going to be cost effective, we don't know. The other issue about giving it early before exposure is, again, that immunogenicity, that you are going to have a higher and possibly longer lasting immune memory if you give it to a younger person.
As I understand, part of the objection to it is, and these are given to children underage, so they're not making the decision, the parents are, is that there are 2 fears. One is that many people, rightfully or wrongfully, a fear of vaccines, thinking it leads to autism or whatever, other vaccines. And I know that the medical profession says it does not. And the other is that it will somehow, if you have this particular vaccine, that it will somehow encourage sexual activity at a young age. Are there any studies that have been done to prove that, disprove that, number one? And number two, the issue about, the vaccine, the preservatives, I mean, how do you confront that with the public? Any one of you.
I'll comment on, I think about the safety issues, that yes, we don't believe that there are any associations with autism, and there are no concerns along those levels. And let me let Dr. Lowy comment a little bit more about the adjuvants, and then I'll come back.
So first, the problem of the association with autism would be one really for vaccines that are given to young children, because that's the age where autism tends to manifest. The young adolescent age, the autism is certainly not a new diagnosis, is not very common. So this
I wasn't suggesting that this caused autism.
Yes.
It's just merely the
No,
dispute.
I'm just saying
Okay.
that this particular, in this particular situation, I think that your second question was
The second question is the whole idea that that some parents think that this will provoke sexual activity.
So there have been several studies that suggest that sexual behavior is not determined by whether or not girls have received the vaccine.
So there was a study that compared people, about 30, it was about 1,000, 1,400 girls, about 30% of them got the vaccine, and the others did not, and they followed them over a number of years to see if there were any changes in sexual behavior, kind of by whether or not they asked for oral contraceptives, condoms, pregnancies, or STDs, and there was no difference. So indirectly, there was no change in their sexual behavior.
Why do you think that there is opposition to this? If this is, I mean, if you look at the numbers, if you look at how safe it is according to your reports, that it can, that it's relatively inexpensive when you do the cost aspect to it, and that it is as I call it, a contagious cancer. Why are you having so much trouble getting it out into the public domain in terms of more discussion?
Well, I think from the standpoint that we look at it in the legislature, I think that it's seen once again that this may be seen as something that is the legislature's imposing itself into what should be a parental responsibility. So that parent-child physician relationship is really where that should exist, and that does this warrant a mandate similar to other mandated vaccines out there. And again, I think that the whole sexually transmitted aspect of it is really what's kind of the radioactive thing here and stuff. So that in terms of moving it forward, a new perspective on it, I think, would be the nature of this being clearly associated with the cancer.
But one way sort of around that is, rather than having a mandated, if there is if it's as great has been presented here, and it's certainly very convincing statistics and information, and the fact that I keep going back to the contagious aspect. Why isn't there sort of almost a voluntary movement? I want my kid to have that sort of attitude.
I think one of the other things that has been stressed, which it's funny because you could stress it the same way about how many people are exposed to the flu but don't get the flu, or how many people are exposed to meningitis and don't get meningitis. But one of the things that seems to repeatedly come up is one that there was a very big concentration initially on cervix cancer, and the comments were, you can get your PAP and you won't get cervix cancer. Well, this is a very different situation now that you cannot PAP for...
But PAP's after the fact. I mean, PAP identifies what you have,
exactly,
which is different.
The other thing that has been said is this is, as we said, 80% of people will be infected with HPV in their lifetime, but the majority of them will clear themselves of the virus. And so a lot of people said, well, it's such a low risk that you're going to actually get it. Why do I need to vaccinate? And that's kind of the same thing that you could say about any number of infectious illnesses. The problem is that we don't know who's going to get it, and we now know that it's not just cervix cancer anymore. It was originally targeted towards women, and the only reason the boys were being considered was to protect women in their lives and not to carry it. But now it's more. It's really that we have recognized over the last 5 to 10 years that this is an epidemic of cancers that we didn't even realize. And now the boys need to be vaccinated to protect themselves. And I think that this kind of range from 2006 on of confusing things that have happened. So the initial targeting of girls, then the second vaccine, and then this question of should we give 2 versus 3, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, this causes multiple different cancers, has led us, we're a little bit behind in educating the public of all the different things that can happen with the HPV virus. And I think that, I'm hoping that with education we're going to catch up.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to throw it out to the group, and hang on to your seat, because this may be a really stupid question. I have the understanding, rightfully or wrongfully, that we keep changing antibiotics because the antibiotics keep getting outsmarted by whatever it is. With all the different strains and types of the 16, the 18, and everything I've just seen, is this vaccine going to solve that? But all of a sudden now we got 10 others. So how dumb is that question?
That's a great question. I think there's sort of a two-part answer. First, vaccines against DNA viruses, which is what this is, tend to be very effective and not to get, you don't tend to get new HPV types coming along. okay? This is not like the flu vaccine where you need a new vaccine every 2 years or something like that. So you would not expect to see anything like that happen. There is some theoretical concern that if you get rid of the bad HPV types, if you will, that they might be replaced by other potentially oncogenic types that are not as serious as 16 and 18. Thus far, there hasn't been any suggestion that that kind of replacement actually occurs.
Greta, that was actually a really good question, because that is one of the comments many people have made when they've gone against the HPV vaccine. I guess I would also mention the one comment that we haven't talked too much about that might be a concern is that at this point we have about 8 years of data showing that the immune response is going to last at least that long. But there is still a question as to whether or not down in the future we would need a booster shot for these patients.
Yeah. I would like to say something actually in follow-up to what Dr. Zerwas was discussing, which is back in 2007, my feeling is that it was really premature to recommend the vaccine to be mandatory because there hadn't been enough experience with the vaccine. It is not common to make a vaccine mandatory within less than a year after it has been introduced. And it turned out that behind the scenes, the pharmaceutical company was supporting various groups to essentially promote making it mandatory, so presumably they could lock up market share before the second company came along. And I think that this, if you will, tainted the vaccine, and there was a firestorm of negative reaction to that. In addition, socially conservative groups, when the vaccine was being considered by the FDA and by the CDC for its approval and recommendations, said, "We like the vaccine, please don't make it mandatory."
All right, I'm going to throw it out to the audience, and I don't have a watch on, so I've neglected. Can I peek at your watch, see what time it is? Ron, you're going to have to pull the plug on me when it's. Okay, good. Any questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
I would like someone to address the difference between, or address what's going on with the autoimmune DNA studies in relation to all the drugs and the immunizations to the cancers. Because you brought up an important part about the skin and it being contagious through the skin and all of the environmental factors that most of us have lived through at this age.
Well, you're lucky I'm not going to try to answer that. I'm going to throw it to the panel.
So thanks for the question. In terms of DNA, in terms of anti-DNA issues, both vaccines are almost completely devoid of DNA. They are protein-based vaccines. The allergic reactions that people have are, the kind of common allergic reactions that occur with vaccines. And it's not even clear whether the allergic reaction is due to the main component of the vaccine or due to something else that might be in the vaccine, but it doesn't occur that frequently.
And I think the allergic reactions, from what I understand, are mostly to a yeast component, but there have been studies with over 10,000 women where they've looked at autoimmune illnesses, and there has been no increased risk related to either of the vaccines and any autoimmune diseases. They've looked specifically at those questions.
Dr. Raimondi, you put up a slide and you said there's a higher incidence among, I think, African Americans and Hispanics. I take it that's access to medical care, and that's more of an economical thing. That's more of an access to medical care than anything else, right?
I think so. And it's not just, the concern is on both ends. There's actually another slide that I have that shows that they're getting vaccinated is the first part, access to care and getting the vaccine. But the slide I showed was actually mortality rates, and unfortunately that also falls into the same range. And in this country, uninsured are more likely to be minorities.
So it's access. Mm-hmm. It's access. Mm-hmm. All right, more questions from the audience, please. Yes, please. Yes, you.
I wonder if Dr. Raimondi could talk about the missed clinical opportunities problem and I wonder if Dr. Raymondetta could talk about the missed clinical opportunities and that physicians are sort of overestimating parental concern and the recommendations.
So, yeah, actually there is data that shows that pediatricians and family practice doctors underestimate the level of importance that the parents place on this vaccine. And between that and the concern that they might be opening up a bucket of worms talking about sexually transmitted diseases, they don't offer it. So the main reason that we're not vaccinating at higher rates seem to be that the physicians are not recommending it. Not because they're not recommending it, that's because they don't even mention it. And again, this goes back to how we marketed it initially, is that it was marketed for cervix and sexually transmitted disease. But what we're trying to do now is educate pediatricians and family practice doctors to address this as they would any other vaccine. You don't discuss how you get your disease. You say this is a vaccine to prevent cancer, and we're going to give it to you because this is what we recommend before you enter 6th grade.
More questions? Yes, ma'am.
Vaccine was the first cancer vaccine, also spreads sexually, but we vaccinate infants. Why was the decision made to vaccinate adolescents rather than infants with the HPV vaccine?
Yeah, a very interesting question. When the HPV vaccine was initially approved, it actually was approved in the United States for adolescents. The uptake, however, was very low, not because of the concerns we've been talking about here, but just because it was low. In other countries, the development of chronic HPV infection is particularly when you acquire the infection as an infant. And so there was a rationale to move it down to giving it to infants. The problem with doing that for the HPV vaccine is one of duration of protection. The vaccine has only been around for 8 or 9 years now, and so while there seems to be good protection for that period of time, the problem you would have if you were to vaccinate infants or something like that is you wouldn't know what the protection rate would be, and you would be trying to protect against an exposure that was happening many years later.
Yes.
Hi. My question is for Representative Zerwas. Thank you so much for your service, sir. We're just so lucky to have you in the ledge and have you on our side on this issue. Can you envision a future in Texas where we might have an HPV mandate, or has that ship sailed? And should we be looking more at educational requirements and that kind of thing? That's my first part of the question. My second part is, I totally agree with you that the anecdotes and the stories are what helps to pass bills, just like with the meningitis bill. But this is a different issue, and how do we protect our witnesses in hearings from some of the backlash and the shaming that happens around this particular issue?
Yeah, good observations. I don't think the ship has sailed on a mandate. Do I think that it could happen this session? I'm doubtful, frankly, but I would say that just because it is mandates for vaccines, mandates for anything are pretty radioactive, and especially considering the conservative slant that you have in the legislature, I would say it's a stretch. But it's not a bad stretch. It's one that I think certainly can be justified by good public health policy and science, and you throw some good anecdotes on top of that, then you have a real chance for making that happen. Protecting the people, the witnesses, people coming forward is a little bit difficult because you don't know how some people are going to react in the position that they're going to take and so forth. I do think that as I've seen witnesses who have come forward on other public health type issues and stuff, they've come very well prepared. They're very courageous, as you know, coming to testify before a group of people sitting around a big semicircular table like this is pretty intimidating, frankly, and maybe it's intended to be that way. But it does really help people prepare themselves for coming and actually providing the testimony, being the witnesses, and so forth. So I think that what I have seen is that although there is that chance of some backlash and things of that nature, most people come prepared for that. They've already sort of tested the waters on it, and they are ready to deal with that. What I'll say, and I shared this with Greta at first, is that the people that are anti-vaccine, they're anti-vaccine, and you're not going to educate them, but they're a very, very determined group of people. They show up at the Capitol even at a 2 a.m. hearing, and their voice is going to be heard. And you will not tell them that their child is not autistic as a consequence of a vaccine injection, just because that's what they feel that's how it happened. Maybe I would have been the same way if it was my child.
Another sort of twist to it, though, is that some people don't want want the government out of their business, so to speak. Keep the government. Whereas in some ways, if this could have evolved where you have almost like a Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, where mothers are demanding that the state pay for the protection of their children, but it just sort of got off on the wrong foot. I mean, you could have had a whole other thing. It's like, what about my kid, sort of thing.
Yeah. In terms of, tell me again, Greta, what you're framing?
Some people don't like the government mandating your kid's going to get vaccinated, whereas if instead it had been sort of almost a grassroots of mothers demanding that the state take care of my child, it could have had sort of a public rollout a little different, and it may have had a little different impact.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's a very good example with MAD too.
I just wanted to make a comment that each year that we've kind of had our summit, we've had a session where we've tried to build survivors again. And so this last year we started or assisted with the starting of a National Cervical Cancer Coalition in Texas. And each time we try to build the survivors to be able to tell their stories. I think it's incredibly important. And one thing that I usually do when I give a talk is have people close their eyes and say, raise your hand if you or your best friend have been affected by HPV. And the hands that go up are huge. And I think that there is a group that we could be building. As one of our survivors said during a talk, she said, babies are sexually transmitted too, and it really goes to show that it's a common human problem.
Yes.
My question's for Greta. What can we do as doctors, academics, to really get the message out there so that the parents are coming in and demanding the vaccine? Kind of switch the table, even if it's not to mandate it, but just coming into the doctor and saying, why isn't my child being offered this vaccine?
I think a couple of things. One is speak English, because most of us don't understand half of what you all say. It's like, we don't understand this, you can tell from some of my questions as I sort of fumble through them is that there's certain things we understand. We understand contagious. We get that. There's certain things that are not meant to scare people, but rather to, to put it in the public domain so people are talking about it. Because you really do want people talking about it. And I'm not so sure, I don't know, but how many pediatricians are really talking and educating parents? I'm not so sure how many pediatricians know about the vaccine. Maybe they all do. I don't know. Maybe I'm just the only one who doesn't. I'm not a pediatrician. But it really is, a matter of getting people sort of to discuss this. And if you say the HPV virus vaccine, it's like, and if you say there's a contagious cancer out there, it's a little bit different, how the public responds. It's not meant to design to scare people, but look at Ebola. Ebola, terrified the living daylights out of all of us, because we saw the impact it was having, and we saw it spreading to the United States, and it's not meant to alarm, but really to have, to get the discussion out there with the right words. And look, I know that part of the problem is Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann said something that has set this discussion back. And so the first thing to do is, and in fact, when I wanted to ask someone here, a couple of people here, I felt everyone get sort of rigid on me because I have a feeling that was sort of electrifying to the issue. Well, so you know what I would do? I'd go visit Michelle Bachmann. I'd sit down and talk with her, and maybe she'll be convinced or persuaded, or maybe not. I don't know. But suppose that she's dead wrong on this topic, as you all think. Well, and suppose you convinced her, and suppose she came out and said, I thought about this, and I've changed my mind. Do you know how many headlines that would make? So we're unfortunately, you guys are in a science world. This is a PR world, and and it's not, it's like, and unfortunately, you have to use it as a weapon to get your message out. But you have to know how you do it. Make it simple. We need it simple and real. We need it to matter. Anyway, that's my thought.
On that note, I'm here.
Did I just get myself into trouble that I said?
No, you didn't, actually. But what's really remarkable about what we've just experienced is we have individuals that are really have an opportunity to help us take charge of what is, in my opinion, a public responsibility. This is, for me, a child care issue. Our children don't have the knowledge that they need at the time that they can best benefit from the vaccine. We've talked about hundreds of thousands of lives that are lost each year across the world, but there are many millions that suffer from these diseases that extract a significant toll even if they do not die. Infertility, problems with voice and swallowing, it is a huge problem of suffering as well as death. So it's really remarkable that we were able to assemble such an august group, to have Greta, who is one of the most visible figures in our nation, out here, and to have her power and bully pulpit bring awareness to this is tremendously powerful. To have Doug Lowy, it is the dream of every scientist to have their discoveries be converted into something that saves lives. And, you know, high schools, in my opinion, should be named after this individual because his brilliance, as reflected by the Lasker and the president's recent imprimatur, has made a difference in the lives of many. Lois Ramondetta, I have the privilege of serving many of the faculty at MD Anderson, the world's best cancer faculty, in my opinion. She is on the front lines dealing with this misery each and every day. And to bring her energy and passion to this is an extremely powerful message for all of us. And John Zerwas, you know, his own family was recently touched by cancer. He gets it. And to have somebody of his intelligence, his background, his courage to be able to take on the real important issues that face this great state, and as this state goes, so goes the United States, it is very important that we have individuals like him that can really bring this home so that we can make a difference for generations to come. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks to the panel. Let's give them a round of applause.